welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, August 28th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start with a couple of predictions for this upcoming week. It is officially week one. We're about 24 hours, a little bit more from these games officially kicking off, and we're going to have 5 straight days of college football. So it's about to really get into kick into high gear, and cannot wait for it. But we're going to start with the Georgia-Clemson game. That's the one that I feel like I have the best beat on. So I started with that one today. Then we'll get into the Thursday night football games. We'll get into Colorado, North Dakota State. We'll get into Minnesota, UNC. And then we'll take a little bit of a break from the predictions until tomorrow, where we'll get into a ton of predictions. But we're going to get into UConn possibly joining the Big 12. That is a big-time news story that came out the last couple of days, and definitely has a couple more hurdles to jump, but a very, very interesting product that we will definitely talk about in the third segment. Then we'll close the book on week 0. We'll give you updates on what did we learn about SMU, Florida State, and Georgia Tech. What did we learn about these teams, and what are some people overreacting just a little bit about these teams. Then we'll get into my bold predictions for the 2024 season. A couple that I think are pretty bold, and I'm sure you guys will have a problem with a couple of them. I can almost promise you that. But definitely a really, really fun show today. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, be a little interactive, is to use that little $ at the bottom of the chat. It's a super chat. You can click that button, write any comment, question, criticism, anything you want in there, and it will pop up on the screen with your name. I will absolutely get to you at some point. Sometimes the chat goes a little bit too quick for me to keep track of, so sometimes it's a little bit easier to get your question known. If you'd rather use the gsmcpodcast.net page, that is still up there for you to use if you would like to, but super chat tends to be just a little bit easier, so utilize that if you'd like to. But let's go ahead and jump in, because we got a ton to get to today, and we're going to start with Georgia versus Clemson, the game that's happening about 15 minutes about east of me right about now. So it's going to be incredible to watch this game unfold in Atlanta on Saturday, and there's a ton going into this game. You know, Clemson coming off a couple of years that were not what they wanted them to be, and they want to kind of bounce back and be on the right track. Well, this would be a great way to do it in week 1, no doubt about it. And then Georgia walking in, being the big dogs, being the dominant force in college football. It seems like they're going to stay that way for quite some time, but maybe this week is a little bit of a stumbling block in that race for them. But let's go ahead and jump into this, and let's get into all of the different details around this one. This one is at Saturday at noon. UGA is favored by 13.5 points right now. Over-under set at 48.5. And I think when you're looking at this from 50,000 feet takes, when you're looking at just the whole thing, Clemson is still a huge question mark on offense. No two ways about that. Georgia has seemed to be a well-oiled machine the last 3 years, and is going into a building that left a very sour taste in their mouth the last time they were there, when they lost to Alabama in the SEC title game. So I think you're looking at this game, it's very possible to fall into the trap of Georgia's just going to come out hunting and Clemson's going to be a little bit shell-shocked. And I kind of utilize that. I kind of buy into that. But at the end of the day, I don't know if I'm as gung-ho on Georgia just outright blowing them out as everyone else is. But let's get into the big-time storylines as we get into this, and then we'll get into the specific teams. But one of the big ones, UGA's running back situation is not great right now. It sounds more and more like Trevor Etienne is going to be suspended. In fact, Pete Thamel yesterday put out a kind of prediction of sorts that he was going to be suspended for this first game. It looks like Roderick Robinson is going to be out. He had to deal with a turf toe injury that had to get him surgery, so that's something that they're going to have to monitor over the next little bit. And then you have Branson Robinson, who's still working his way back from a patellar injury, so not a lot of options in that running back room for Georgia that has obviously been the staple of that offense for a very, very long time, and likely will be again this year. It's going to be kind of an interesting start at that position, that's for sure. Clemson's wide receivers is the other thing that you're watching very, very closely. Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore have shown themselves to be the most talented wide receivers in that room throughout fall camp. They are definitely the best guys in that room right now, and they're going into a game where we're going to find out a lot about them pretty quickly. quickly. Around 1 p.m. on Saturday, we're going to be talking about them in one way or the other, whether it's they're putting way too much on these young kids' shoulders or, man, these kids walked onto the field and just immediately started making plays. Now, they do have to go up against guys like Dalen Everett, who I think is going to be a superstar at the end of the year, if I'm being honest. I think Julian Humphrey's a really athletic player. I think Daniel Harris has made big-time strides this offseason. So I really like the back end for Georgia, but maybe these freshman wide receivers can make something happen, and TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco can change the complexion of this game just a little bit. And then it's a rematch from 2021. This was kind of the game that set off the UGA dominance over college football. They have not lost a regular season game since that day, or well, they didn't lose it that day, but they have not lost one since then and have done an incredible job. Now, will we get a little bit of a repeat, a little bit of a defensive battle again this time, because it was 10-3 last time and Christopher Smith was the only one that scored a touchdown, and that's a safety for Georgia. So it was definitely a very benign game at times, definitely a rock fight, if you will, but I think we might just get a couple more points this time around. But let's get into the weeds a little bit here and talk about how Clemson can win this game. What do they need to do to find their way into an upset in Atlanta? And the biggest thing for me is you got to establish the run early. This is an absolute must. There's no two ways about that. And Phil Maffa is a darn good running back to be able to establish the run with. When you have almost 1,000 yards rushing a year ago, 5.4 yards per carry, when you outrush Will Shipley in that room, it's going to be very impressive. And now Will Shipley's gone. You have to assume more of the load is going that direction, especially because the depth in that room is not necessarily incredible. Keith Adams Jr. is a guy to watch there, but overall, it's not necessarily the incredible unit that you would think, but Phil Maffa is definitely plenty capable. And then you look at the UGA defense, and if there's going to be a place to attack them, at least the way that it seems, it's going to be that interior defensive line. So we'll see what can happen there. I think that's something that, if this doesn't happen through the first quarter, if we're going through the first quarter and Phil Maffa has about 10 yards rushing and can't get anything going on the ground, it could be a really long day for Clemson. And then get Cade Klubnik into a rhythm. I think that's something that goes right with the run game. If you get the run game going early, it's much easier for Cade Klubnik to get into this game and get rolling. And I think it's a lot of really short passes, a lot of passes where he knows where the ball is going, where he can put the ball there, like screens, drags, all of the stuff within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, just to get him going. And then you can just go to anything he's comfortable with. If he's really comfortable throwing dig routes over the middle of the field, go to that. If he loves throwing seam routes to Jake Burningstool, do that. If he loves throwing out routes to a couple of the elite wide receivers on the outside, that's the way they should go. So it's all about getting him into a rhythm early on and then letting this kid's talent take over, because I know there were some questions about him last year, but it doesn't change. This is a very talented kid, and if you can get him going in a game, there's not a lot of defenses in the country that could be able to stop him at his very best. Now, we haven't necessarily seen that too often in his college career, but maybe Saturday is when he flips that official switch. And then the last thing for me is it's got to be the Peter Woods and PJ Parker show. Throughout this game, the UGA O-line is going to be incredible, and we know the run game might be a little bit more suspect with those running backs being out. This is the place where you're able to set the tone. With Peter Woods in the interior and TJ Parker coming off the edge, they're both very special players. You know, TJ Parker having 5.5 sacks as a freshman is outright ridiculous, and I think he's going to be even better this upcoming year, but he's going to go up against Xavier Truss. He's going to go up against Ernest Green III, and he's going to have to be ready to go. There's no two ways about that. So it's going to be really interesting to watch those two especially go to work, because I think them being able to possibly blow up the run or heat up Carson Beck in the pass rush game is going to make things so much easier for this back end that has just about a million things to keep track of for that UGA offense. And now let's move on to what UGA needs to do to win and how they can pull it off this Saturday. And trust your O-line and running backs, mainly your O-line in this case, because you obviously have some running back injuries. There's no doubt about that. But you look at the guys that are going to be available. Branson Robinson is going to be available. I think he's still recovering and likely won't be even near 100% if I had to imagine. You do have Cash Jones, that's a good veteran. The guy that I'm watching is Nate Frazier. I think this might be a coming out party for that freshman. I think he is remarkably talented. So many people have been tying him to Todd Gurley, and if you remember in 2014, Todd Gurley did some mean things to Clemson, so maybe Nate Frazier can pick up where he left off in do some mean things once again this Saturday. But I do think Cash Jones is another really good option here. He understands this offense. He knows exactly what he's going to do. And frankly, behind this offensive line, I think there's a world where I could get 3 or 4 yards. So I think you trust this offensive line to get the push on the interior with Tate Ratledge, with Dylan Fairchild, with Jared Curtis, and just say, we're going to run the ball. That's who we are, and I can't imagine it's going to be anything different for the Georgia coaching staff, frankly. And then spread the ball around. And frankly, this is going to be the case for pretty much every UGA game you watch this year because they got so many weapons out there. They did lose Ra Thomas because of some of the off-the-field issues with him, but they still have Dominic Lovett. They still have London Humphreys coming over. They still have a myriad of tight ends. They still have so many running backs that can make play. Dylan Bell, who's one of the most gadget players you'll ever find in football. So many remarkable guys, and frankly, an elite facilitator in Carson Beck. So the way I look at this Clemson defense is the strength is through the middle, where it's Peter Woods, followed by Barrett Carter, followed by R.J. Mickens, right through the middle of that field. If you can spread this team out a little bit, if you can make it tough for them to really bear in on the run and really focus on one guy or one scheme, you're going to be able to have a lot of success, no doubt about that. So I think spreading the ball out, getting these defense a little bit more spread than they're comfortable with is likely the way that UGA is going to go about business. And then finally, keep K. Klubnik confused. That was a mouthful, but keep him confused on Saturday because this is going to be a kid that you've shown that there are holes, there are issues in his armor, no doubt about it. And I think the biggest thing here is if you get him off on the wrong foot, if you get after the quarterback, we talked about this a little bit throughout building up to Georgia's season. The pass rush has to be a ton better. In 2021, when they first played, Georgia had 49 sacks throughout that season. Last year, they only had 30. I think it's going to be a little bit closer to that 21, but it definitely has to be in this game. And then on the back end, it's all about Malachi Starks. He is the guy that makes everything so difficult for everyone around the country. And frankly, I think he's going to make a number of plays in this game. And that back end in general, it was a worry going into the offseason. I'm not so worried about it anymore. I think Daniel Harris is a guy to watch that maybe isn't all the way where you want him to be, but at the end of the day, very talented kid. And I have very, very little problems with this back end as of right now. But moving on to my official pick, I am going to give you a score for some reason. I know that's kind of a fool's errand, but I figured I'd take my shot at it. And I am going to go Georgia wins this one 27-13. I do think that line at 13.5 is right where it should be. I think it could be a 7-point game going into the fourth quarter or in the fourth quarter, and then Georgia does enough, and Nate Frazier maybe just has a big-time play towards the end of this game to win the game for Georgia. So I'm leaning Georgia. I think it's going to be a battle, so I am going to take the under 48.5. I feel pretty good about that. I think it's going to be a rock fight, especially early on, and I think this Clemson offense is not necessarily walking into a position where they can work out kinks. I think it's going to be pretty ugly week one, and then we'll figure out what this Clemson offense really is starting week two. But obviously an incredible game in Atlanta, only about 10 minutes from where I am right now, so maybe I'll try to make my way down there and see if I can, sneak in the back and find this game. But overall, it's going to be an incredible game, no two ways about that, and I think it's one of those that is going to kick off the college football season, at least for week one on Saturday, just in an incredible way. So I do have Georgia winning that one by about 14. I think the line is just about right, but let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a Thursday night football games. We're going to do Colorado and North Dakota State. We're going to do Minnesota UNC, and both of those are going to be very interesting games. So we'll break them down right after this, so stick with us.